And before I go in describing a little bit more about what you're going to be experiencing this evening and introducing Andy Wellspring and sort of how this all got put together, because I think that history is important, I would like for everybody to either lower or close your eyes and listen to this extraordinary soundscape. These are bioacoustic samplings of the ocean. And tonight, as we know, we're focusing on ocean noise. And there are so many things going on out there. It is a sound universe. This is how animals communicate. From shrimp, plankton, right, Michael? That they have a sound, plankton, phytoplankton, our whales, walrus. Just think about all those animals. So I'm going to ask you to turn it up and have everybody just listen for a minute. Just imagine what it's like out there. So that's just some of what goes on out there 24/7. Just some of the animals. And we have a fabulous presenter for you here tonight who's been spending decades studying ocean noise. So we'll find out more about that. I'm Thais Mazur. I think I know just about everybody in this room, but in case I don't, hello. I was really privileged to make alliances with Scott Mercer and Tree Mercer. Could you raise your hands, please? Andy Wellspring, Nicole Martinson from Surfrider, and my daughter Tanaya, who all got together and said, what can we do? Because we know that we are part of the map for the naval weapons testing that is going to be happening and probably has already begun off our coast. And we've said, okay, let's bring people together and learn as much as we can, get in a dialogue together about what is going on and share our concerns and what we think the challenges are, but also find a way to galvanize and make change happen. So our cohort is an open group. We call ourselves Marine Life Advocates. You may have seen our website online. And we are community members and scientists and ocean advocates and people who care about the ocean. We live here, of course. And we're dedicated to the conservation and the protection of our coastline. And we are extremely lucky to have Sonar, the class here at the Mendocino High School that Andy helps run, or maybe you lead it, and all the students here this evening doing the tech. Thank you very much. And sometimes, in fact, maybe it's happening to everybody in this room, I can get really overwhelmed by all the things happening right now in the world and the stressors. And I feel that what is happening right now on a larger scale is that we are being conditioned to fear and distrust each other, including our own instincts and our own hearts, and in a way that silences us. We can't find words for that. It's hard for us to figure out what to say or how to respond or how to take action. But there is one saying from the Talmud that I go back to again and again. In fact, I look at it every day because I do a lot of work in social and environmental justice daily. And that saying is this: do not be daunted by the insurmountability of the world's grief. Do justly now. Love mercy now. Walk humbly now. You are not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you free to abandon it. So with that said, I'm going to pass the mic over to Andy, and he's going to say a few things.
Don't really have anything to say compared to that, but thank you all for coming. And like Thais said, I help with the Sonar class at Mendocino High School, and it stands for the School of Natural Resources. And we are studying environmental science, and it's combined with an English class. And so we have 3-hour-long classes and the ability to take trips here and there around the coast and work with the NoYo Science Center. See Sue up in the front here, and do a lot of different things outside. And it's a really, really great program. And any donations that you're able to leave tonight will be benefiting the program, and the Sonar program, that is. And in particular, we're looking right now to raise donations to bring a guest speaker to campus for the benefit of the whole school. Someone we met on a field trip last month up to the Hoopa Reservation in Northern California, and he inspired the students about taking action around climate change and what we can do about it, and they invited him to come down here. So we're looking to make that happen for the whole school, and so it's not just our class that gets to experience him, but everyone else here too. So if you are able to leave some donations, we'd much appreciate it. And if you need to use the bathrooms, they are immediately outside the door. Take a left. You'll see one right away. There's one also behind it. If you walk around left a little bit more, there's 2 bathrooms outside that you're welcome to use, and coffee and tea and water and some treats out here in the hallway. The paperwork out on the tables there are some comments that people wrote. Part of how we all came together, Thais started mentioning, was that the Navy is talking about expanding their testing. They had to get reapproval to do testing off the coast here, all the way up to Washington, from northern Mendocino up to Washington, and a little bit in Alaska as well. So there are some comments out there that people wrote in opposition to their plan. If you'd like to take copies of those, you're welcome to. There's one from the Sinkyoni Intertribal Federation here. It's 10 tribes in our area. There's also a comment by Thais and Anna Marie Stenberg. And then you'll see another summary there that shows once all the comments were submitted, the Navy summarized them, and you could take a copy of that and see how they really reduced the depth of what we all wrote in our comments. So that process is still unfolding, and hopefully we'll be able to hear some more about it tonight and tomorrow, and what is actually going to happen with the testing. And we look forward to hearing from Michael some more about the sound and what's happening out there. So thanks for everyone for coming.
So you can see we have a big program tomorrow as well. We have scientists here in the room right now, but these scientists are people that have spent decades and decades studying the ocean and ocean life. We are so honored to have Michael here this evening and again tomorrow, and then all the other scientists that will be joining us. I mean, this is just extraordinary. Thank you for being here. So now it is my great pleasure to introduce a longtime friend and colleague, Michael Stockert. He is the, yeah, you can clap, yay. He just made a very, very, very long drive up from Marin, taking Highway 1. Thank you, Michael, for taking that course to avoid the fires. He's the executive director of Ocean Conservation Research. He's also an acoustician and a naturalist by trade and a musician by avocation. And he has written and spoken about marine bioacoustics and the impacts of ocean noise pollution on marine life since 1992. He has presented in national and regional hearings, national and international television, radio and news publications, museums, schools, and universities. His understanding of both physics and biology has proven invaluable in court testimony and legal briefs, defending the environment against the dangers of human-generated noise in the ocean. As founding director of Ocean Conservation Research, he's using his fluency in bioacoustics to explore the impacts of noise on ocean animals, to inform ocean policy and practice toward decreasing human bioacoustic impacts on marine habitats. And I know from working with him, this is a man who really believes in doing no harm. Michael, thank you so much.
That's been a really rich intersection of working with your arts and your aesthetics and introducing us to Lisa Denning, who did these beautiful cinematography on the screen. This will find itself, I think, in a second. Anyways, I'm glad to be here. Thank you for coming. I'm a marine bioacoustician. I was introduced at the Oakland Museum a couple of years ago as being a marine biocrustacean. So I'll take it. And Thais is definitely correct. The ocean is an acoustic environment before it's a visual environment. If you think about what happens at night when it's dark or when you get down a few hundred feet and there's no light down there except for bioluminescence, pretty much all animals, all the way up and down the food chain, rely on sound to establish their relationship with their surrounding. And that is what we're concerned about. And I'll present tonight a very brief, maybe 15-minute presentation that looks at the framing of our relationship with the ocean and sound over the past few hundred years. And the regulation that started coming in initially after the Marine Mammal Protection Act occurred. And then we're going to roll a movie called Sonic Sea that was produced jointly by NRDC and World Wildlife folks. And that is an hour film, and there's questions afterwards if you would like to stick around a little bit, have any questions, we can do that. Tomorrow there's a bunch of really amazing people coming and presenting on all kind of matters of oceanic things and climate, and so I'm really looking forward to that. Tomorrow afternoon I'll be presenting a little bit more about the physics and biology, so you'll hear some sounds, some animal sounds and things like that tomorrow. But tonight I'm going to maybe take this over to where I need to touch the computer to control it, and get my glasses on so I can see where I'm going here. Okay, actually I could probably do this with that. So, how loud is the ocean? It turns out that before industrialized whaling, it was really loud. It was louder than it is today, largely because of all the whales and other animals that were making sound in the ocean. But when we started industrializing the ocean, particularly when it was fossil fuel driven whaling, they pulled out a lot of animals. In fact, they pulled out millions and millions and millions of animals. And so when the concern began about whaling depletions were happening, initially the whalers were saying, oh, they're just getting wise to us, they're knowing how to hide. And then finally, people were saying, no, they're just not out there anymore. In 1930, they started the International Whaling Commission to more or less regulate the industry so that they could have a longer horizon than they were anticipating. That turned out to be kind of just the beginning. That the IWC demanded that there was a biologist on board all the processing boats, taking notes and trying to figure out the science and trying to corroborate whether or not they were actually losing populations and what a sustainable yield would be and all these other kind of things. You have to remember, at that time, whales were considered brute animals, and so there wasn't really a lot of passion or compassion for them. People were fearful of them, largely because when you attacked, particularly sperm whales and gray whales, when you attacked them, they would get mean and they would attack back. And that was a very brutish thing. I should go back here. I can go back this one. That one here. This is an interesting piece. This was taken from a 1935 publication. These are just one species of whale, and this happened to be the sperm whales, but they had right whales, sperm whales, and what else? There's two other species. But this is just, you know, on their logs of where they pull these animals out of the water. So after they started, that was 1935, that was kind of some of the first work that came out of the remit for the International Whaling Commission. And they continued to pull them out at a grand old clip. And finally, one of the things, I wrote a paper on how loud the ocean was prior to industrialized whaling, and one of the models I needed to do was figure out how many whales were in the ocean, you know, at that time. And there's a paper that was published by Phil Clampman and Yulia Yerbatchenko. The Russian processing boat had this biologist on board who was supposed to basically report quantities of whales. And he was basically reporting this stuff, but of course the captain was saying, the right here, this is how many we take out. So the reportage was 10 times fewer than what they had pulled out. So when they were saying they were pulling 4,500 humpback whales out annually, they were actually pulling 45,000 out every year. Well, he was a biologist that when he passed on, his niece, Yulia Yerbatchenko, inherited these papers and was able to publish them. And that was in 2002, 2003. And it was shocking. Fortunately, in 1972, largely, I should say there was a couple drivers, but one of them was, how many people remember the Songs of the Humpback Whale album? Beautiful, and all the sounds showed up. And people started realizing that these animals not only had beautiful things to offer us, they had culture. And so, along with all the other environmental laws that were being forced upon the industrial governance that we had at that time, when we came out with the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, and Endangered Species Act, the Marine Mammal Protection Act came out. And that was largely to protect these animals from overabuse. But as you see here, they wanted to curb international whaling operations, not to kill it, but to curb it, to really manage it a little more. Purseine fishing, some of you might remember that a lot of the purseaners were getting bluefin tuna. The bluefin were being accompanied by dolphins, and the dolphins would basically ride on top of them, and they had some symbiotic relationship that wasn't quite understood, but the purseaners would go there and just basically take them all and then throw the dolphins overboard because they kill all the dolphins. So the Marine Mammal Protection Act started regulating that. Zoos and aquariums had, also in the early 70s, they had to basically kind of regulate that to some degree. They, after the capture of, I think it was Shamu was the first orca that was captured, and it was so cute and was making so much money for Marineland that they wanted to go out and start capturing more, and they were doing that at a grand old clip. So the Marine Mammal Protection Act was regulating that as well, not stopping it, but regulating it, saying you gotta do, you gotta keep this within certain bounds. And then subsistence hunting was something that's always, particularly up in the north, the Inuit up there have been hunting marine mammals for a long time. That's how these subsistence. So there was some kind of engagement with that as well. They were regulating what they call takes, and we're fortunate that the word take was kind of put into the canon of law, because it really does talk a lot more sternly about what's happening. But a take really means any interaction or contact with an animal that modifies their behavior. That's kind of what the threshold of the word take is, all the way up to killing them. So we have at least a word that describes what's happening. And they had to come into various, I'm going to move this around so I can read from the screen here. The acoustical disturbance thing was not really in the initial laws. I didn't really think about it that much. Why it came into law is because oil and gas exploration, they would, before the use of the air gun, commonly they were just throwing sticks of dynamite over the transom boats, and the explosions were occurring, kicking a big pulse down into the earth, and then they were reading the returns, and they were able to find oil and gas. And so they were killing a lot of fish and other animals, and so in 1981, they kind of marginally included this idea that this explosion should be somehow regulated to protect these animals. They also had this idea, when they realized that they're having to regulate noise, that two of the enterprises that humans were doing in the ocean, one of them was oil and gas exploration and extraction, or E&P, exploration and production, and the other was military operations. So they had to come up with some get-out-of-jail-free card for these two efforts of modern civilization. So they came up with this idea of the incidental harassment authorization. And it was a pretty ambiguous framework. They had to determine what percentage of the population was going to be affected or impacted by the particular proposed operation, and then they would have to determine what was acceptable. So the general threshold was you could either maim or kill 10% of an existing population, and that would be okay. So this is a human conceit. It's so bizarre. Anyways, we had to, otherwise we'd have to shut the Navy down and shut oil and gas operations down. And you know what would have happened if we did that back then? We'd all be using renewable energy, and we wouldn't have military efforts all over the world. So we had to pause that one. So let me see here. So the level A and level B takes were defined in 1994. They really needed to have something a little bit more clear. Level A is actually physiological damage. It's deafening the animals, killing them. Level B is a behavioral threshold. If an animal avoids or is distracted by or changes their behavior relative to whatever particular operation, whether it's noise or kayaking or persianing or what have you, that would be qualified within the context of level A or level B thresholds. It wasn't really, regulators like really clear thresholds, really go, no go. It makes it a lot easier to work around. Of course, they were finding that these disruptions were essentially, this picture here explains it. This dolphin is swimming in a noise field that would be qualified as a level A take. Well, that's, obviously it's not too problematic for that. So they had to kind of come up with a little bit more nuanced definitions. In 2007, they came up with some frequency bands that kind of segregate animals into their hearing regimes. You know, high-frequency animals, odontocetes, which are the dolphins and the porpoises, hear high-frequency noises better than low-frequency noises. And conversely, the mysticetes, the baleen whales, can hear the low-frequency sounds more. So, and then pinnipeds. So they have these different thresholds, which supposedly creates a more nuanced regulatory framework, and it's an improvement, but as we'll see, actually I get into this a little bit more tomorrow, it's not quite, it's still, I mean, this little slope here, I don't want to get into the nuts and bolts of it, but that was a concession to the oil and gas industry because it's down in this area where all their seismic surveys are happening. And if they kept the curves what's more practical in terms of what these animals can hear, they would be out of business. They'd have to come up with another way of doing this. So we fought over that a lot, and they ended up getting, as I say, a little bit of a wink and a nod from National Marine Fisheries Services. So, and this is what these guys do. This is a PGS, it's called a ram form, and this is dragging a bunch of seismic air guns, which I think I have in here. It was air guns that kick off these explosions that you can hear, in some cases, 2,000 miles away. And they're pulses that are repetitive. We're just monitoring one right up in the Cook Inlet. Right now, we have moorings up there. And every 2 to 7 seconds, there's an explosion that you can hear a few thousand miles away. And these guys are saying, well, it's not a problem, it's not killing anything, but we have a lot of evidence. In this particular study, we're gonna see not only evidence with the marine mammals, but we're also did some plankton. Last week we pulled plankton out of the water. There seems to be evidence that these explosions actually kill the zooplankton, which is the foundation of the food chain in the ocean. So if we find this to be the case, they're gonna have some explaining to do. So we hope to find this. Our first kind of anecdotal, it didn't look like we had this. We got in front of the seismic survey vessel, sampled plankton, and hadn't been impacted. Then we got right behind it and sampled the plankton there. And we'll see, it's in the lab right now. What a lot of people don't know is what we're doing is we're creating these big factories down on the bottom, on the seafloor. And those are also not particularly quiet. So I had this slide earlier that talked about level A and level B. There's two thresholds of level B. There's impulsive noise, which is things like the seismic surveys, but there's also continuous noise, which are like humming or screeching or whatever particular noise. These are all seafloor processing equipment. When you stick a straw into the earth, you don't just pull out oil that goes to the gas station. You pull out oil and brine and slurry and all kinds of nasty stuff. And they want to separate the stuff that they can't use and not pump it all the way up to the surface because it takes energy to do that. They have re-injection pumps. They pump it back into the deposit. And so they're doing this kind of setting up these refineries on the seafloor. And they're pretty noisy. This is what brought us up here was the Navy and their operations. They're gonna, I think by the ocean it's really big, and you wouldn't be able to see them even standing on the cliffs here, because if they're 150 miles off, they're over the curvature of the earth, so they could do all kinds of stuff over there. We're not aware of what's happening. If we had hydrophone moorings there, we would hear some of this stuff. But this is the other part of the get out of jail free card. If you looked at the incidental harassment authorizations that are in the North Pacific testing and training range in the environmental impact statement, those are the types of things that they're talking about. How much explosions, how many boats are going to blow up. This is, sea trials. They're testing this boat to see what kind of what will happen when they impact nearby the hull and see what happens to the boat. So they do that kind of stuff, and then they're also going to be. I guess another worry I have with the Navy operations isn't just the noise. I mean, noise is really my bailiwick, but they put a lot of sensing equipment out there that are all electronic instruments that have batteries in them, and so just thousands of these things that they end up disposing of every year. And what happens when you dispose of them? Okay, next year it's not going to be a problem, but 10, 15, 20 years down, when all those things start corroding and the battery acids and all this other stuff kind of releases into the water, I have a problem with that. And usually people don't, when they're looking at the environmental impact statements, they're looking at things like explosions. They're not looking at the long-term systematic impacts that these particular things will have. So, we're kind of slowly, death of a thousand cuts, slowly degrading the habitat of the ocean for the animals that live there. And just because they're not washing up on the shore immediately doesn't mean it's not a problem. Yeah, but they are too. Yeah, these are very noisy, and among other things, so the other concern about the Navy noise is not just the explosions, but they have various types of sonars. They have low-frequency sonar that they use for tracking submarines and other types of underwater long-distance communication applications. And then they have mid-frequency sonar, which seems to be most problematic because it ends up damaging, it's right there in the kind of the most sensitive socialization range, communication range of dolphins, porpoises, beaked whales, odontocetes. And so when we've had these catastrophic strandings, it's largely been as a product of that mid-frequency sonar. The Navy has been getting, the initial, when this first started happening, we were having hearings on the low-frequency active sonar in 2000. They wanted to sonify the entire ocean, and that's like a really bad idea. But we were having hearings on that, and then there was this incident with mid-frequency sonar basically brought a bunch of beaked whales up in the Bahamas so 17 beaked whales and 1 minke whale was basically deafened by this sound. Well, if sound is the only way you can really get around, avoid predators and what have you, they could beach themselves. And there's a couple of incidents where you see that these animals will beach themselves and they've got sharp bites out of their bodies, and they wouldn't have been able to protect themselves if they're not been able to hear. So when a deaf dolphin is a dead dolphin. So that's part of it. And then, of course, there's this thing that's really unspoken is all the shipping. So the ocean is 10 times louder now than it was just 50 years ago because of shipping, international trade, globalization of trade. If we go back to that original statement when we finally started, all the whales were pulled out of the ocean. In 1964, the oceans were probably as quiet as they've been for like 200 million years. And that's when people started saying, hey, we should actually measure the sound in the ocean. So that's a baseline, it's kind of a cruel baseline, but it's getting louder and louder. Tomorrow we'll talk about solutions to this, some of the possible solutions, and also being able to focus a little bit more on what the impacts are. So here we are. Thank you, and I've got a book out in front afterwards. Oh yeah, the Sonic Sea movie. A lot of this is really orbits around the shipping noise is featured in it, and the Navy military sonar is featured in it. Chris Clark says something that's quite remarkable. If you notice, I'm going to go back a few here, I think. Try to go back a few. Here we are. Okay, so if you notice, most of the shipping traffic is north of the equator. And we have a real challenged population of North Atlantic right whales along this coast and all the way up into Bay of Fundy and Labrador, this area up here. There's only about 400 of these left, and we lost 8 of them last year to ship strikes and other things. The right whales were probably the first whales to have their population were brought down so fast and so far because they were coastal, near the coast, a lot of blubber. They were very docile, and when the harpooners harpooned them, they wouldn't sink, they wouldn't fight back, and they yielded a lot of whale oil. So they were killed pretty much everywhere around the world. This population is not recovering very well, but this population down here is. And so Chris makes this correlation that one of the differences is all the noise. So anyways, I think that's where we are on this, and you're ready to play it? You think you can get that? Oh, I have another one. That's not gonna work. And the other one is. If we get online, okay, yeah. If not, I'll say the other one's. Okay,
So thank you, Michael, so much. We want to introduce this film here, Sonic Sea. That's great follow-up to what Michael's been telling us regarding the ocean and ocean noise. And don't forget, after this film, Michael will be available for questions. Thanks again, Michael.
March 15th, 2000, the day of infamy, as far as I'm concerned. Woke up in the morning, started having coffee, telling our team of people that had just arrived that, you know, the chances of seeing a beaked whale in a 10-day period are slim. My assistant, Dave, came running